A human archaeologist accidentally awakened an alien queen, and now he has to travel to her planet. The ice fought him every step of the way, which seemed appropriate for a moon that had spent the last 10,000 years trying to kill anything stupid enough to land on it. William's drill bit screamed against the frozen substrate, throwing up chips of crystallized atmosphere and ancient dust that had probably last moved when this place still had a name anyone remembered. His breath came out in clouds inside his helmet because the expedition's heating budget had apparently been calculated by someone who thought absolute zero was just a suggestion. "You know what I love about archaeology?" Marcus said over the comm, his voice crackling with interference from the magnetic anomalies that made this rock such a navigational nightmare. "It's the warm beaches and tropical climates." William didn't bother responding. He learned 3 months into this expedition that Marcus would fill any silence with increasingly elaborate complaints, and right now he needed to focus on the scanner readings that had led him to this particular patch of ice in the first place. The numbers didn't make sense. Everything about this moon screamed dead, had been screaming it for millennia, but his equipment kept insisting there was something active beneath the temple ruins, something that was drawing power in microscopic amounts from sources his instruments couldn't identify. The drill punched through into empty space with a sound like the universe's longest sigh. William killed the power and peered into the darkness below, his helmet lamp cutting a pale cone through air that hadn't circulated since before humans figured out fire. The chamber beneath was maybe 4 meters down, its walls smooth in a way that natural geology never managed. Artificial, constructed. Exactly what they'd been hoping to find, and exactly what made his hands shake slightly as he secured the descent line. "Tell me you're not going down there alone," Elena called from the surface camp, because she had the frustrating habit of being the voice of reason when William would have preferred enthusiastic enablement. "I'm not going down there alone," William lied, already swinging his legs over the edge. The chamber opened up around him like a mouth, all clean geometric angles and walls that still held traces of what might have been paint or circuitry or something his limited understanding of xenoarchaeology couldn't quite categorize. His boots touched the floor with a hollow sound that suggested more empty space below, layers upon layers of this dead place keeping its secrets. But it was the far wall that stopped his breathing, the far wall that made 3 months of frozen misery suddenly feel like destiny's warm embrace. The pod stood 3 meters tall, its surface a matrix of crystal and metal that seemed to shift between states of matter when he wasn't looking directly at it. Through the transparent face panel, he could see her, or the shape of her at least. The blue-tinged skin was his first clue that she wasn't human. Not quite. The delicately pointed ears that swept back from her skull were the second, but it was her face that held him transfixed, serene in whatever passed for sleep in this technology, beautiful in a way that made him suddenly aware of how alone he'd been out here, among the ice and ruins. "William, your vitals just spiked. What did you find?" Elena's voice barely registered. "I think," he said slowly, circling the pod while his camera captured everything, "I found someone who had a worse day than us." The glyphs covering the pod's base were in a script he'd seen fragments of before, scattered across a dozen dead worlds in this sector. He'd spent years trying to decode them with limited success, but these were clearer, more complete. Warnings probably, or maybe operating instructions. The panel beside the pod looked inactive, its surface dark and cold to the touch, even through his glove. And that should have been his first warning. Dead technology stayed dead. That was the cardinal rule of xenoarchaeology, right before "don't activate anything," and seriously, "don't touch that." He touched it. The panel blazed to life with light that had no business existing after 10,000 years of darkness. The pod hummed, a sound that vibrated in his chest and made his teeth ache. Symbols cascaded across its surface in sequences that looked almost like a countdown, and William had just enough time to think several variations of profanity in multiple languages before the crystal face split along seams he hadn't noticed, releasing a breath of air that smelled of electricity and flowers that had never grown on any world he knew. She opened her eyes, and they were the color of winter sky over deep water, and William realized with absolute certainty that he had made a terrible, wonderful, completely irreversible mistake. Her first breath sounded like wind through a canyon he'd never visited, deep and slow and utterly foreign. Adeline, though he wouldn't learn her name for another few minutes, sat up with the fluid grace of someone who hadn't been unconscious for longer than human civilization had existed. Her eyes focused on him with an intensity that made William acutely aware he was still holding his scanner, like it might protect him from whatever came next. She spoke, and the words rolled out in a language that sounded like music played backward through water. His translator earpiece made a sound like a cat choking on mathematics, sputtered out something about honored vessel and temporal criminality, then gave up entirely with a defeated beep. "Right," William said, because his brain had apparently decided that casual conversation was the appropriate response to waking an alien queen. "So, welcome back to consciousness. I'm William. I'm an archaeologist," which is apparently just a fancy word for person who makes catastrophically poor decisions in sealed chambers. She tilted her head, those remarkable ears catching the light from his helmet lamp, and said something else that his translator interpreted as either, "Why have you summoned the ancient fire?" or, "Your hat is making inappropriate noises." The device was really struggling. Adeline swung her legs out of the pod with the casual confidence of royalty, which was fortunate because William had frozen completely, his fight-or-flight response stuck in some third option that mostly involved standing very still and hoping this was someone else's problem. She was tall, he noticed, and dressed in garments that seemed to be made of liquid metal that held its shape through sheer stubbornness. Her skin wasn't just blue-tinged, it was actually blue, the color of deep sapphire, and marked with faint patterns that might have been tattoos or circuitry or both. She reached toward him, and William's carefully maintained scientific detachment chose that moment to suggest he should probably run. But then she touched his wrist just above his glove seal, and something happened that his physics education had absolutely no framework for understanding. It felt like a wire being pulled taut inside his chest, connecting him to her with an almost audible snap. And from the way her eyes widened, he suspected she felt it too. "Okay," he said, his voice coming out higher than he'd intended. "That's new. That's a new sensation. Is this normal? Please tell me this is normal for your species and not some kind of ancient alien equivalent of static shock." Adeline spoke again, slowly this time, and his translator managed to grab hold of enough phonemes to spit out something marginally coherent. "The bond awoken. You are marked. Protocol demands." "Protocol demands what exactly?" William asked, though he suspected he wasn't going to like the answer. Outside the chamber, the ground started shaking. Not an earthquake. This moon was geologically dead as a doornail, but something else, something that made the ice above groan and crack. His comm exploded with panicked chatter from Marcus and Elena, their voices talking over each other about energy signatures and impossible readings and something massive powering up beneath the northern ridge. Adeline smiled for the first time, and it transformed her face from regal to almost playful. She said something that his translator actually caught clearly. "My ship knows I'm awake." "Your ship," William repeated numbly. "Your 10,000-year-old ship. That's been buried in ice for longer than humans have had written language. That ship is just going to, what, shake off the ice and fly?" She nodded like this was the most reasonable thing in the universe and started walking toward the rope he'd descended. She moved like liquid, like someone who'd never questioned whether the universe would arrange itself for her convenience. And William found himself following, because apparently the bond thing meant his feet had opinions independent of his brain. "Elena," he said into his comm, trying to keep his voice level. "Remember how you told me not to go down here alone? And I said I wouldn't? I need you to add, 'Don't wake up sleeping alien royalty' to the list of things I'm no longer allowed to do unsupervised." "Your vitals are all over the place," Elena responded, her voice tight with concern. "What happened down there?" "I'll explain when I understand it myself. Right now, I need you to evacuate the camp to a safe distance from the northern ridge." "How safe a distance are we talking?" William watched Adeline scale the rope with impossible ease, her movements efficient and purposeful. Above them, through the hole he drilled, He could see the night sky starting to glow with auroras that definitely hadn't been there an hour ago. Mars, he said. Mars would be a good distance. Maybe Jupiter if you want to be really cautious. The shaking intensified, and somewhere in the ice, something vast and ancient began remembering how to wake up. Adeline reached the surface and looked back down at him with those winter sky eyes, and William felt the bond pull taut again, felt her presence in his chest like a second heartbeat that wasn't quite synchronized with his own. "You coming?" Marcus called down, his voice cracking with either fear or excitement or both. "Because whatever's happening up here, you're going to want to see it." William grabbed the rope and started climbing toward what he suspected would be either the greatest discovery in human history or the worst day of his dramatically shortened life. Possibly both. The northern ridge was splitting open like an egg, which seemed like an aggressive metaphor until William watched several thousand tons of ancient ice calve away to reveal the hull of something that made their expedition shuttle look like a child's toy. The ship was enormous, all elegant curves and surfaces that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it, and it was shedding 10 millennia of accumulated frost with the casual indifference of someone shrugging off an old coat. "That's not possible," Marcus said, staring through his helmet with the expression of a man watching his understanding of physics pack its bags and leave. "The power requirements alone are apparently not a concern for people who put their queens in crystal stasis pods," William finished, climbing out of the chamber just in time to see Adeline stride toward her ship like she'd only been away for a weekend. The bond hummed in his chest with every step she took, a sensation that was becoming less alarming and more just deeply weird, like having someone else's emotions playing as background music to his own thoughts. Elena grabbed his arm, her grip tight enough to feel through the suit. "William, what did you do?" "Archaeologist things," he said weakly. "I found an artifact. I documented it. I absolutely did not read the warnings before activating it because the warnings were in a dead language, and also I'm apparently an idiot." "You woke her up," Elena said, and it wasn't a question. Adeline had reached the base of her ship, where a ramp was extending with movements that were far too smooth for technology that predated the Bronze Age. She turned back to look at William, and he felt the bond pulse with something that might have been expectation or amusement, or possibly just her biological way of saying, "Hurry up." "I think I did more than wake her up," William admitted. "I think I might have accidentally married her, or bonded with her, or signed some kind of cosmic contract that my translator is still trying to parse." Marcus made a sound that was half laugh, half hysteria. "You accidentally married an alien queen? How does that even happen?" "Very carefully," William said, and with a complete lack of adult supervision. The ship's engines were coming online now, a sound that William felt in his bones more than heard, a subsonic thrumming that made the moon's thin atmosphere shimmer, with colors that didn't have names in any human language. Adeline gestured to him, an unmistakable summons, and the bond pulled at him like a fishing line hooked somewhere behind his sternum. "She wants you to go with her," Elena said, her voice somewhere between horrified and fascinated. "William, you can't seriously be considering—" "I don't think it's a consideration thing," William interrupted, already walking toward the ship because his body had apparently decided the bond's suggestions were more compelling than his survival instinct. "I think it's more of a, this is happening whether I like it or not thing." He climbed the ramp, his boots ringing on a surface that felt like metal but moved slightly under his weight, almost organic. The interior of the ship opened up around him in ways that made his spatial reasoning give up and go lie down. The corridors curved in directions that shouldn't have been possible within the external dimensions, and the walls were lined with what looked like living circuitry, bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with something he couldn't identify. Adeline was waiting in what he assumed was the bridge, a circular chamber dominated by a projection of local space that hung in the air like a three-dimensional map made of light and probability. She spoke, and his translator finally managed something approaching coherence. "The bond is complete. You called me from the long sleep. The old laws are clear." "What old laws?" William asked, though he suspected he wasn't going to love the answer. "The one who wakes the queen must guide her home," his translator offered, struggling with syntax that apparently didn't translate well into standard. "The dead of awakening must be honored. You are bound until the world that was is found again. Right, William said. So just to clarify, when you say must guide you home, you mean I have to physically come with you to your home planet, which is presumably very far away and possibly doesn't exist anymore? Adeline touched a panel, and the ship responded like an extension of her will. The projection shifted, showing stellar drift patterns that would take him weeks to calculate manually, highlighting a region of space that wasn't on any human navigation chart. She looked at him with those impossible eyes and said something his translator rendered as, "My world waits. The question is whether you will wait with it." Outside, he could see Marcus and Elena backing away from the ship, their tiny figures dwarfed by the vessel that was now humming with enough power to light a small city. His comm crackled with Elena's voice, urgent and concerned. "William, your biometrics are going crazy. Whatever's happening in there?" "I'm fine," he lied, watching Adeline's fingers dance across controls that responded to touch and thought and possibly a pure expectation. "I'm just experiencing some light existential crisis and possible quantum entanglement with an alien queen. Nothing we didn't cover in grad school." The ship lifted off with a grace that defied everything William knew about mass and inertia, rising through the thin atmosphere like it was swimming rather than flying. Through the view screen, if that's what it was, he watched his expedition camp shrink to a tiny cluster of lights on the frozen surface, watched Marcus and Elena become invisible specks, watched his entire life on this moon become something that existed in his past tense. Adeline spoke again, her voice softer now. "You fear this path." "Terrified," William confirmed, "because honesty seemed important when you were bonded to someone who could apparently feel your emotional state. But also curious, which is either the archaeologist in me or just garden variety poor judgment. Hard to tell sometimes." She almost smiled, and the bond hummed with something that felt like approval or possibly just relief that he wasn't screaming. The ship turned toward the stars, toward coordinates that pointed at empty space on every human map. And William realized he was about to learn whether her people had survived their long sleep or whether he was helping a queen return to a kingdom of ghosts. The ship folded space like origami, which William's physics professors would have insisted was impossible right up until the moment the universe bent itself into shapes that made his inner ear scream in protest. One moment, they were leaving the frozen moon behind, and the next they were somewhere else entirely, sliding through dimensions that his brain kept trying to interpret as colors that didn't exist and sounds he could taste. "I'm going to be sick," William announced, gripping what he hoped was a railing and not some critical ship component. Adeline made a sound that his translator couldn't parse, but his gut recognized as laughter. She touched his shoulder, and the bond flared with something soothing, like warm water washing away the worst of the spatial nausea. Her voice came through clearer now, the translator finally getting a handle on her language. "Your kind still travels the slow way. This must be strange." "Strange is one word for it," William managed, his stomach slowly remembering which direction was supposed to be down. "Violently unpleasant is several more words for it. How long does this usually take? For travel to the homeworld? 3 of your days? Perhaps 4? William did the mental math on how far they'd have to travel in 4 days to reach a planet that wasn't on any human charts, decided the numbers involved were offensive to reality, and chose to focus on more immediate concerns. Like the fact that his expedition pack contained exactly 1 change of clothes, 3 protein bars, and a half-empty thermos of coffee that was probably already cold. "I don't suppose this ship has anything resembling food," he asked, looking around the bridge at surfaces that might have been storage, or might have been decorative, or might have been the ship's digestive system for all he could tell. Adeline tilted her head in that way she had, the gesture making her ears catch the bioluminescent light from the walls. "The ship provides, though your biology may find our provisions challenging." She led him through corridors that seemed to reconfigure themselves when he wasn't looking directly at them, past chambers that served purposes he couldn't begin to guess. They passed what looked like a garden growing under impossible light, plants with geometries that hurt to observe too closely, and a room filled with crystalline structures that hummed with the same frequency as the bond in his chest. The provision chamber, his best guess at its function, contained what appeared to be a wall covered in organic pods that pulsed gently with internal light. Adeline touched one, and it opened to reveal something that looked like fruit if fruit had been designed by someone who'd only had the concept explained to them very poorly. "This is safe for most carbon-based metabolisms," she said, offering him what might have been an apple or might have been a small alien brain. "Though the flavor may surprise you." William took it because the bond suggested refusing would be somewhere between rude and culturally catastrophic, and bit into it with the resignation of a man who'd already made peace with today being weird. It tasted like strawberries mixed with static electricity in the color blue, which shouldn't have worked but somehow did. "Not bad," he said, chewing cautiously. "Definitely not the worst thing I've eaten on an expedition." That honor goes to Marcus's attempt at synthesizing coffee from local vegetation on Kepler 442b. Adeline watched him eat with an expression that might have been amusement or scientific curiosity. "You travel much, for your kind." "Enough to know that most ruins stay ruined and most dead civilizations stay dead," William said. "Present company excluded, apparently." She moved to a panel that extruded something like a bench, settling onto it with that fluid grace that made William feel clumsy just standing near her. The bond hummed steadily between them, and he was getting better at reading its fluctuations. Right now it carried a weight that felt like old sadness mixed with something harder to define. "My people chose the long sleep when the sky itself began to tear," she said, her voice taking on a quality his translator struggled with. Something like singing and remembering combined. "The scholars saw it coming, a wave of destruction that would unmake star systems. We had no way to stop it, only to hide and wait for it to pass." "How many of you went into stasis?" William asked, sitting across from her, because standing was starting to feel awkward. "Hundreds of thousands, spread across dozens of worlds. Each chamber with a queen, each queen a seed for rebuilding." She looked at him with those winter sky eyes, and the bond carried a question he felt more than heard. "Your people know nothing of us. 10,000 years and we have been completely forgotten." "Not completely," William offered. "We found fragments, ruins, enough to know something remarkable existed out here once, just not enough to know you were sleeping instead of dead." The ship shuddered slightly, adjusting its course through whatever passed for space in this folded dimension. Adeline rose and gestured for him to follow, leading him to a chamber that held a projection system far more sophisticated than anything on the bridge. She activated it with a thought, and suddenly they were standing in the middle of a star map that showed not just positions, but time, stellar drift patterns cascading backward through millennia. "This is where we were," she said, highlighting a cluster of systems that William didn't recognize. "And this is where the maps say we should be now." The projection shifted, accounting for 10,000 years of galactic rotation, and William felt his breath catch. The coordinates pointed to a region he knew, a dead zone that human surveys had marked as gravitationally anomalous, but otherwise unremarkable. Ships avoided it because navigation equipment went haywire near the boundary, instruments showing readings that made no sense. "It's hidden," he said, understanding clicking into place. "Your world is still there, just behind some kind of defensive barrier." Adeline's smile was small but genuine, and the bond sang with something that felt like hope tempered by 10,000 years of uncertainty. "Behind barriers that only royal blood can bypass, if my people survived, if they maintained the technology, if they still remember what we were, then yes, the world waits." "And if they didn't survive," William asked, because someone had to voice the possibility hanging between them, "then I am a queen of ghosts, and you have bonded yourself to the last of a dead civilization?" She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Your people have a concept for this, I think. Bad luck?" "Catastrophically poor timing," William corrected, and was rewarded with that almost laugh again. "But I've built a career on that, so at least I'm consistent." The days aboard the ship developed a rhythm that William found simultaneously comfortable and deeply surreal. Adeline spent hours at the navigation systems, her fingers moving through holographic displays while she corrected for stellar drift and compensated for gravitational anomalies that shouldn't have existed. William spent those same hours trying to document everything with equipment that was laughably inadequate for the task. His recorder struggling to capture technology that operated on principles his species hadn't discovered yet. The bond had become something he noticed only when he paid attention to it, a background hum like tinnitus, except pleasant and occasionally informative. He could sense Adeline's location on the ship without looking, could feel the general shape of her emotional state, like weather patterns on a distant horizon. Right now she was focused, tinged with anticipation that grew stronger as they approached their destination. "Question," William said, looking up from his notes on the ship's propulsion system, which seemed to run on a combination of quantum mechanics and sheer audacity. "When we get to your planet and this bond thing completes its protocol or whatever, what happens to me?" Adeline turned from the navigation display, and he felt her attention shift through the bond before her eyes actually met his. "The bond will release you. You will be free to return to your people with whatever knowledge you have gained." "Just like that? No obligation? No strings attached? No ancient clause that says I have to stay and help rebuild your civilization?" "The bond is a safeguard, not a prison," she said, moving closer with that liquid grace that still made him feel like he was moving through molasses by comparison. "It ensures the awakener guides the queen home. Once home is reached, the debt is satisfied." "Seems almost reasonable," William said, "which makes me suspicious, because nothing else about this situation has been reasonable." She settled into the seat across from him, her posture relaxed in a way he'd learned meant she was about to ask questions that made him uncomfortable. "You speak of returning to your people as though it is a simple thing, but your thoughts through the bond suggest otherwise." William grimaced because apparently having someone directly connected to your emotional state made deflection significantly harder. "It's complicated. My expedition team is going to have questions I can't answer without sounding insane. My academic institution is going to want proof I can't provide. And the galactic authorities are going to be very interested in why I disappeared into space with an unknown alien and her impossible ship." "You could provide proof," Adeline pointed out. "I am proof. The ship is proof." "Right, but then I'd be the guy who brought back functional alien technology and an actual living representative of a supposedly extinct civilization, which is the kind of thing that starts political incidents and gets you locked in a research facility for the rest of your life." He paused, considering. "Also, my dissertation advisor is going to be insufferable about this. He's going to claim some kind of academic credit for sending me to that moon in the first place." Adeline made that sound again, the one his translator interpreted as laughter but felt more complex through the bond. "Your concerns are very small for someone who has traveled across space with a queen. My concerns are very practical for someone who still has to file expense reports and explain why he abandoned several million credits worth of expedition equipment on a frozen rock." The ship chose that moment to alert them with a sound like crystal bells, and the view screen shifted to show a region of space that looked wrong in ways William's eyes struggled to process. Space itself seemed to shimmer there, like heat distortion, but three-dimensional and aggressive about it. "The barrier," Adeline said, rising with sudden intensity that flooded through the bond. "We have reached the outer defenses." William joined her at the view screen, watching as the ship approached the distortion. Up close, he could see patterns in the shimmer, mathematical progressions that repeated at different scales, fractals of warped space-time that would have given his old physics professors religious experiences right before their brains leaked out their ears. "This is going to be unpleasant, isn't it?" he asked. "Very," Adeline confirmed, her hands already moving through the control interface. "The barrier reads biology, confirms royal lineage, and allows passage. But it does this by examining you at the quantum level while we transit." "Examining me how exactly?" "Thoroughly." The ship touched the barrier, and William's entire existence temporarily forgot how to be coherent. He was turned inside out and folded backward. Every atom in his body checked against some cosmic database, while reality took a brief vacation from making sense. The bond blazed like a star going supernova, and through it he felt Adeline anchoring him, holding his consciousness together while the universe decided whether to permit his passage or scatter his component molecules across several dimensions. Then they were through, and William was on his hands and knees on the deck, gasping like he'd just sprinted through a singularity. "I've changed my mind about everything. Take me back. I'll face the dissertation advisor. I'll live in the research facility. Anything is better than that." Adeline helped him to his feet, and through the bond he felt her amusement mixed with genuine concern. The worst is past. Look. He looked at the view screen and forgot how to breathe for entirely different reasons. The planet hung before them like a jewel, all blue oceans and green continents wrapped in clouds that caught the light of a binary star system. But more than that, orbital structures ringed the world in elegant geometric patterns, stations and ships and constructions that glowed with the same bioluminescent quality as Adeline's vessel. "They survived," William said, his voice coming out rough with wonder. "Your people actually survived." Adeline's hand found his shoulder, and the bond sang with emotion so intense it made his eyes sting. Joy and relief and something deeper, something that felt like 10,000 years of hope finally justified. Her voice was soft when she spoke. "They did more than survive. They flourished." The ship's communication system came alive with signals, voices speaking in Adeline's language with inflections the translator struggled to capture. Questions, demands, confusion. And then someone said something that made Adeline laugh, actual full laughter that resonated through the bond like music. "What did they say?" William asked. "They asked," she said, still smiling, "why the Queen's ship carries a biosignature they do not recognize. They want to know who I brought home with me." "What are you going to tell them?" "The truth," Adeline said, her eyes bright with something that might have been mischief. "That I brought the archaeologist who woke me, the universe's most consequential accident." The descent through the planet's atmosphere was nothing like the violent entry burns William had experienced on human vessels. Adeline's ship moved through the air like it belonged there, like the atmosphere itself was welcoming her home after an absence measured in geological time. Through the view screen, he watched cities spread beneath them, architecture that blended organic curves with crystalline structures, buildings that grew as much as they were built. The bond had begun to change in the last hour, its pull loosening like a knot slowly untying itself. William felt it happening and wasn't entirely sure how he felt about it. The connection had been intrusive at first, uncomfortable in its intimacy, but he'd grown accustomed to the background awareness of Adeline's presence. Losing it would be like losing a sense he'd only just learned to use. "You feel it," Adeline said, not quite a question. "The bond unraveling?" "Yeah." William touched his chest where the sensation had been strongest. "It's like saying goodbye to someone who's been standing right next to me for days." "The protocol completes itself," she said, guiding the ship toward a landing platform that extended from a structure vast enough to have its own weather system. "You brought me home. The debt is satisfied. You are released." The ship settled onto the platform with barely a whisper of contact, and William could see figures gathering outside, hundreds of them, all with that same sapphire skin and those elegant pointed ears. They wore garments that shifted between states, decorations that might have been jewelry or living symbiotes, and every face turned toward the ship carried expressions of wonder and disbelief. "They thought you were a myth," William said, watching the crowd grow. "A legend that was probably never real to begin with." "I was a hedge against extinction," Adeline corrected, rising from the navigation station for the last time. "A seed planted in case the garden burned. They hoped I would never be needed, and when I was not awakened after 1,000 years, after 5,000, they assumed the protocol had failed. Instead, it just took a catastrophically curious archaeologist with poor impulse control." She smiled at that, full and genuine, and William felt the ghost of her amusement through the rapidly fading bond. "The universe has a sense of timing, it seems." The ship's ramp extended, and Adeline walked toward it with the bearing of someone who'd been born to this moment. William followed because he wasn't sure what else to do, his role in this story complete, but his feet not quite ready to stop moving. The crowd outside fell silent as Adeline emerged into the light of two suns, their combined radiance catching her skin and making the markings along her arms shimmer with deeper color. Someone in the crowd spoke, their voice amplified somehow, words that William's translator rendered as something between a formal greeting and a prayer. Adeline responded in kind, her voice carrying across the platform with effortless authority, and William caught enough of the translation to understand she was identifying herself, reciting lineage and purpose and the circumstances of her awakening. Then she gestured to William, and several hundred pairs of eyes focused on him with an intensity that made him wish he'd worn something more impressive than field clothes that had been through a space fold and a quantum barrier scan. "This is William," Adeline said in a language his translator could actually handle, probably for his benefit. "He woke me from the long sleep. He guided me home across the stars. He has honored the ancient protocol and asked nothing in return but safe passage back to his own people." The crowd murmured, a sound like wind through impossible architecture, and someone stepped forward from the masses. They were older than Adeline, their skin marked with patterns that suggested either age or rank or both, and they studied William with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his questionable life choices. "The archaeologist," they said, and William's translator made it sound almost amused. "Who finds what should stay lost and wakes what should stay sleeping? Your kind has a word for this, I believe. Troublemaker." "I prefer persistently curious," William said, because if he was going to be judged by an alien civilization, he might as well commit to the bit. Though troublemaker has been used, yes. The older one's expression shifted to something that might have been approval. "You have our gratitude, William of the persistent curiosity. You have returned to us something we believed lost beyond recovery. What gift can we offer one who has given us back our queen?" William opened his mouth to say that passage home would be sufficient, that he'd already gotten more than enough material for a dozen papers and a lifetime of academic credibility, but Adeline caught his eye, and through the last threads of the bond, he felt her suggestion, gentle but clear. "Knowledge," he said, the word coming out before he'd fully thought it through. "A record of what happened here. How your people survived, how your civilization developed while the rest of the galaxy thought you were extinct. Not for conquest or exploitation, but for understanding, so that when humans find other ruins, other lost cities, we remember that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence." The older one considered this, their head tilted in that way Adeline had, a gesture William now recognized as thoughtful evaluation. "Knowledge can be a dangerous gift." "All the best gifts are," William said, feeling the bond give one final pulse before dissolving completely, leaving behind only memory and the ghost of connection. "But I think we're ready for it. Or at least, I'm ready to argue we should be." Adeline stepped closer, and without the bond he had to read her expression the old-fashioned way, through body language and the slight quirk of her mouth that suggested she was holding back laughter. "You could stay," she said quietly. "Study here. Learn from us. Witness what 10,000 years of uninterrupted development has created. You would be honored, welcomed." William looked past her at the city stretching to the horizon, at the orbital structures visible even in daylight, at the gathered crowd waiting to celebrate a queen's return. He thought about Marcus and Elena back on that frozen moon, probably still trying to explain his disappearance. He thought about his academic advisor's face when William showed up with actual proof of contact with an advanced alien civilization. He thought about all the questions that would follow, all the committees and debriefings, and the sheer bureaucratic weight of being the human who brought back evidence that humanity wasn't alone in quite the way they'd thought. "That's incredibly tempting," he said honestly, "but I think I need to go home and file the worst expense report in the history of human exploration. Also, someone needs to tell Marcus that his theory about this sector being completely dead was catastrophically wrong, and I want to see his face when it happens." Adeline laughed, and the sound was free of the bond now. Just her own amusement offered freely. "You are certain?" "No," William admitted, "but I'm an archaeologist. Being certain about things is against my religion. I deal in probabilities and best guesses and occasionally wild speculation that somehow turns out to be right." He paused, looking at her properly now. This queen he'd accidentally awakened and accidentally bonded to, and somehow, improbably, returned home. "Thank you for not letting the barrier scatter my molecules across multiple dimensions. Thank you for being foolish enough to touch the control panel," she countered. "Without that particular moment of reckless curiosity, I would still be sleeping. My people would still be waiting for a queen who never came." The older one gestured, and a smaller ship detached from one of the orbital structures, descending toward the platform with clear purpose. "We will provide transportation back to human space," they said, "along with data recordings of our history, suitable for your understanding. When your people are ready for more formal contact, The barrier will recognize the genetic signature you carry from passing through it. You may return or send others. The path is open now. William felt something settle in his chest. Not the bond, but something quieter. A sense of completion that felt like finishing a chapter in a book he hadn't realized he was writing. He looked at Adeline one last time. This impossible woman who'd slept through empires and woken to a galaxy that had forgotten her name. "If I ever find another sealed chamber on another dead moon," he said, "I'm going to think very carefully before touching anything." "No, you won't," Adeline said. And she was absolutely right. The ship that would carry him home was waiting, sleek and efficient, and probably capable of crossing distances that would take human vessels months in a matter of days. William walked toward it, his boots ringing on the platform, and didn't look back until he'd reached the ramp. When he did, he saw Adeline surrounded by her people, a queen reclaiming her throne, her ears catching the double sunlight and her face turned toward a future she'd never expected to see. The universe had a sense of timing, she'd said, and watching her step into that future, William thought maybe she was right. Maybe some things were supposed to stay lost until exactly the right moment, until exactly the right person was foolish enough to find them. He boarded the ship, and as it lifted away from the platform, carrying him back toward human space, and all the impossible explanations waiting there, William allowed himself one last smile. He'd woken a queen, traveled across the stars, passed through a barrier that shouldn't exist, and somehow lived to file a report about it. Catastrophically poor timing, or the best accident he'd ever made. Hard to tell sometimes, but he was looking forward to spending the rest of his career figuring it out. The end. And so William's journey ended. Or perhaps it was just the beginning. He returned home, burdened with the weight of impossible knowledge, the memory of an interspecies connection, and the certainty that the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than humanity dared to imagine. But now I want to ask you, dear Sci-Fi Pulse listeners, what would you have done if you were in William's place? Would you have touched that control panel knowing the warnings were written in a language you couldn't read? Would you have followed Adeline among the stars, bound by an ancient protocol you didn't understand? And given the choice of staying in a civilization 10,000 years more advanced than your own, or returning home to face skepticism and bureaucracy, which path would you have chosen? If you enjoyed this journey among the stars, please subscribe to Sci-Fi Pulse to join us on more adventures in the far corners of the imagination. Tell us in the comments what you would have done in William's case. Would you have been the archaeologist who couldn't resist another discovery? And don't forget to hit the like button to let us know you want more stories that explore the boundaries between the possible and the impossible. The universe is vast, and we've only just begun exploring it together. Join us for a new story from Sci-Fi Pulse next time. We'll journey to new worlds, meet new civilizations, and ask the questions that keep us gazing at the stars. Until then, keep your curiosity